Goes through okay. All right, we're learning the Mammar, starting page 19. It says Re'ei Reach B'ni. So it's talking about the blessings that Yaakov has. That Yitzchak gives wants to give Eisav, the older son, the older of the twins, and he ends up giving it to Yaakov. Okay, so it says like this: Re'ei Reach B'ni. He walks in. He says, "I smell kireach asada, like the field, which is referring to the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Asher Hashem, that God is blessed." So he says like this: Lahavin, to understand, the Yitzchak Haven Eisav. At this point, when he says he smells the smell, so to say, of the field that was blessed by God, he's talking to his elder son Eisav. How could he think so strongly of Eisav, knowing who he is, that when he walks in, comes in the aroma, so to say, of the field of Gan Eden, of Garden of Eden. And he says, how in general do we understand Yitzchak's view of Eisav in general? It seems to be contradiction in his own view. And sometimes it says that he had kind of the Rashi says he had he tried to fool his father in questions about Torah, like he asked him questions. How does one tithe what's it called? Tevin is straw, which is not something that requires tithing. And other time, so that's one side. He sees that he's not saying accuracy, and then other times we see he says this is the voice of Yaakov. And Yaakov, meaning Yaakov talks a way of Torah, a way of kindness, and Eisav doesn't talk this way. Why did he not think it was Eisav talking to him? Because he says, Yaakov says, God speeded the way for me so I could be able to serve you faster. And he knows that Eisav doesn't have so to say, he doesn't talk like a godly person. So in one case, he's sitting there thinking he's telling him that asking questions about tithings, and he wants to give him blessings. The other side, he knows that he's not a person who talks and mentions God in this conversation. So therefore he's suspicious of Yaakov, thinking that it's Eisav. Thinking that Eisav, that's officially Eisav, is not Eisav, it's Yaakov. So basically, what's the whole story here? Hakehen like this. Kihine Eisav, page 20. The Eisav is soisafisa da dahava. It's the end, so to say, the discharge, the non-clear alloys of gold. The dahava means of gold. Pseilis hagvura, which means the leftovers of gvura. This gvura, which is one of the attributes of God, is a positive thing. One of the attributes. The shlacha Hashem hagdula v'hagvura. Right, but the negative side, so to say, the discharge, the psilis, the leftovers of gevura, which Yitzchak, that's the attribute of Yitzchak. So the attribute of Yitzchak is the so to say, the psilis, the leftovers of Yitzchak's attributes is Eisav. Shubechinas smilas is zav al kesef. In general, we know the zav is more valuable than silver. When we psilis shalai and the leftovers, or everyone Avram also had. From Avram, from Chesed comes Yishmael. From Avram comes Yishmael. From Yitzchak comes Eisav. But it's not from the attribute, the holy part of the attribute. Part of the attribute means in every attribute, there could be a negative kind of angle to being too kind. There could be a negative angle of being too judgmental, or too much din, too much limitations. And so from that comes Yatza Eisav, Vireisha the Eisav, Itfai the Yitzchak. And we say that the head of Eisav means the positive part of Eisav ends up in the lap of Yitzchak. But the form of Yitzchak, his body, his behaviorism, how he is in the world, outside, beyond his head, that's Eisav, how he is. So Eisav comes from a holy source, but it doesn't translate in a positive way for him because it comes from the gvura, the attributes of Yitzchak, but in a way that's negative. Because in every attribute, it could be used something, it could be positive. And by Yitzchak, of course, it was mostly positive, but that little part of the negative that's in every midah is what comes out of it is Eisav. So Lahavin in Reisha, but if you're saying that the head of Eisav ends up in the lap of Yitzchak, that means that there's a part of Eisav that remains connected. So what is the level of the head? What does that mean? So he's going to explain over here the concept of what does it mean to have the negative forces of life. It says Hiniesh Yud Aleph Samemane Ektaris. We know that there's the 11 spices of the Ketores of the Ketores sacrifice, the incest sacrifice. Like it says Atzori, Vatziparin, the different ones. The Hem Kineged, and they'll correspond to the Yud Kisra and the Misavusa, to the 10 crowns of negative forces. Of Misavusa means impurities. Shuchayis Shibikadusha. This is the vitality of holiness. There has to be for everything. There has to be a force of God. So what is the force of God that gives energy to negativity? That's the seemingly the 11 spices. The question is, why is it 11? So that's the energy that goes into negativity, because otherwise it wouldn't exist.
I thought there were 13, and only one of them, the Galbanum, smelled bad.
No, the 13 is the 13 attributes of mercy. That's not exactly the same thing. We're talking here about the actual 10 sfirot that gives energy in negativity. If everything exists.
Now, how many spices were there?
11. So there was 11 spices. So why 11? Why not 10? So it says if it's Yud Kishin Nisavusa, it gives life to the 10 crowns of negativity. So from the holiness, hey Barbara, welcome back. From the holiness comes also the forces for negativity. But is Eisav. In holiness is only exactly 10, not 9, and there's not 11. However, in the negative forces, then there's 11. Why? Why is there 11 by things that are unholy? Because if the source of it comes from holiness, that the attributes of holiness automatically bow to God, meaning to say they recognize their source of existence and they acknowledge it by serving God. Shem betelim, that they're nullified to God. Machmas, why? They recognize the force of holiness is that is their existence, and they're nullified to their existence, which is godliness. But in non-holy things, that because God wanted there should be unholy things, but there has to be a source. So how could you have a source and that exists and is not automatically nullified to God? So there has to be some sort of disconnect. And the klipas are not nullified to God. They elevate themselves kinesher in the negative attribute of the ego, the chutzpah with the outrageousness, saying v'hainu lefish means to say that as if they exist. They look at themselves as something. With magbiyim, they have elevation, ego. So how does that happen? Because in holiness, the godliness is revealed. And if the godliness is revealed, so they recognize it and they acknowledge it and they nullified it. But in unholiness, so their life source is hidden in them and they don't recognize it. It's as if they say, I'm alive, I'm alive on my own, but they're not alive on their own. They're not recognizing the godliness that keeps them in existence. And how is that? It says that's considered beside godless. That's the way things are in a way of exile. That there's a holiness, but it's exiled in a way that it doesn't reveal itself. And because it doesn't reveal itself, the entity that's siphoning off its existence feels that it's something. Therefore, the effect on them is not the same. Because even though they're taking from holiness, they're not nullified because they don't recognize their source of existence. But on the contrary, he says, not only don't they recognize that they have, when you don't recognize your existence from holiness, automatically you attribute it to yourself and you elevate yourself like an eagle in a negative way. And it gets swallowed up. The meaning to say swallowed up is it doesn't stay, the source of life gets lost in them. And therefore they're able to go against their source of life. But the question is that if it gets swallowed up, then there's a disconnect. If there's a disconnect, why don't they disappear? How does it stay in existence? So here he teaches us, how do they continue to live from and exist from holiness if their life source gets disconnected? So they should, like if you cut a wire, the electricity, the current doesn't go anymore. If their energy is swallowed up, that's the 11th spice. The 11th spice of Lavona of the Shibiyud Aleph Samon Ektaras of the 11 spices of the Ketores, Shu Or HaMakev Aleim Maila. It's giving light over, even though, so to say, their internal life of existence gets swallowed up, but it still connects in an encompassing way to the holiness. And the part that is encompassing, I mean outside, obviously doesn't get swallowed up. So there's, so to say, like a wireless connection, right? There's a wireless connection, although it's not connected directly. So the part of the holiness, so to say, that gets swallowed up and is now totally dominated by negative, its existence is siphoning in an encompassing way from holiness. And that's why there has to be an 11th spice. The 11th spice remains holy, but it gives a chayis, it gives a vitality in an encompassing way. And that, so to say, disconnect is how negative forces could live, exist, thrive, lift themselves up and say, I'm going to fight God, I'm going to fight godliness and holiness, and still exist. But because it's only coming from an encompassing energy, it's above their das, their hakara. Hadas is recognition. They're not recognizing that. They don't feel it. So to say, it means to say this, just technically. But the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is it's kind of mechanical. They can't exist without having an internal life force. The question is that internal life force needs to be connected back to the main, so to say, the main grid. How does that happen? So if it gets swallowed up and becomes itself an entity of negativity, means gvura, that the character of the attribute is still there. And that character now becomes negative. Means chesed, kindness, becomes a negative kindness. Gvura, which we know could be horrible, a person's going to be in a negative way, din, judgment, destruction, that becomes a negative force. But how does it stay in existence? Means there's the character and the energy of the sphira. It has an encompassing energy that it stays in an encompassing connection, which is not something that's felt by them. And therefore, the part that's internal, that's giving them the actual conscious life, gets swallowed up and stays and becomes, like, so to say, a negative force. Therefore, it's not a contradiction for them to live from God and fight God and fight godliness, lift themselves up in a way of chutzpah and say, I don't need God, I don't recognize God. And he says, what is this 11th spice? That's the connection of the main 10 spheros that remain holy, and when they were revealed in existence, when they are bepnimius, then they affect bittul, nullification. But that 11th spice is able to take from that energy and give it an encompassing energy to give existence and a continued existence, so a kiyum, to negative forces. And that 11th spice is represented by the head of Eisav. And therefore, when Eisav dies, right, when he gets killed by the son of Yaakov, by the grandson of Yaakov, Chushim, so then they disconnect, he cuts his head off. What happens when he cuts his head off? So the head remained the 11th spice, that's holy, that gets buried with Yitzchak. But the body doesn't get into the cave of the Machpelah. The Hainu, Bechinas Makiv, the head of Eisav is that Makiv, is that 11th spice. And that stays always connected to Yitzchak. Mamish Bekadusha, Bechinas Makiv the Eisav. And therefore, he's saying it's not a contradiction. Eisav is not a contradiction. He has multiple things going on in him. He has the head in him, and therefore he's asking questions in Torah. He asks, how does one tithe a straw? We tithe the pneumis, but the way he lives his life, the energy that's within him, he doesn't talk a Jewish talk, he doesn't talk a godly talk, he doesn't talk about God. And Yitzchak knows this. So Yitzchak's not, the unawareness of Yitzchak as a father is not that he's blind to Eisav. He sees Eisav as the whole story, and he knows that he has a very good side to him. His head is holy, and he's trying to figure out, how do I connect his head with his body? How do I change Eisav? When he knows, then it's known, he says, the life force of the 10 crowns of unholiness. So where did that come from? Why is it that way? That there is such a life force of negativity? It says, it's a chayus that gets swallowed up. It's a verse in Job, gets bala swallowed up, it kind of gets spit out, and there's something negative that takes hold of it. And he explains that's the idea of there is in the character of a man to have that there's a time where there's within the man the negativity, because God created that there should be negative forces. And where does that come from? And it This is the idea, the concept of the breaking of the vessels. That the breaking of the vessels was that there was an energy that had lights and there was vessels, but they were very strong lights and the vessels were small and the lights were large, and therefore created an explosion. And in that explosion came a force. There was a disconnect between the vessel and the light. And that's why there's still till today, there's still a concept of negative forces. There was life and then there was death. Death means that there was no holiness anymore. Death is a negative thing. That's why it only came to the world with sin. V'gam, and he continues, page 21. That's one thing. So one thing is that there's in the world negativity that we learned in Bereshit. That comes from the breaking of the vessels. It's nothing to do with what we did. We didn't contribute to that concept. And then he adds to that, how does it become our problem? Like we learned. Once we ate from the tree of knowledge, that became part of our issue. Like it says in the book of Gilgulim, which is a Kabbalistic sefer, page 21 of Shimon. So we're trying to understand the difference between why does Yitzchak want to bless Eisav? So he doesn't not understand Eisav. He knows who Eisav is, but he knows that Eisav's head is holy because there's an original source that's holy, and his body is the problem. So he's trying to connect the head to the body. So why is there the negativity? Why is there the disconnect? So he says one is because of the breaking of the vessel. And the other one is we ate from the tree of knowledge. And the tree of knowledge had that negative force of the breaking of the vessels. But it was beyond us, but now it became part of us. And that's the concept of the Galus HaShechina. Galus HaShechina means there's a life force in the world, but it's exiled because it's giving life force to negativity. Mammar Zal, and as it says, again, this Mammar, this is what you see on the bottom, is a tremendous amount of footnotes because the Mammar is talking very much cryptic. Or just nikudot points, and on the bottom has all the elaborate concepts. So we've learned a lot of these concepts before. It says, like it says, like Goli Yisrael elek dei lahaysev lehem gerim. Why did God exile the Jewish people? Wasn't as so much as a punishment. That's an old argument. There's no punishment that's worth the 2,000 years we've been in Galus. But the idea is to get the gerim. What are the gerim? The gerim are the sparks. Those sparks that got lost in the breaking of the vessels, and then part of it, the tree of knowledge, and then became part of the human life. We had to go out there and bring those sparks back, reconnect the life force that got stuck in the gullus and negativity and bring it back to holiness. So even Eisav, he had sparks. What are the sparks of Eisav? The descendants of Eisav who converted to Judaism. And he gives an example. Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir was one of the main opinions in the Mishnah, student of Rabbi Akiva. So he's a descendant of Eisav. He's a convert. Onkelos Ager was a Roman aristocrat who converted the famous Onkelos, who translated the Targum on Chumash. Also convert and also descendant of Eisav, because not all converts, of course, are from Eisav. With Shmai of Avtalion, and even before that, with Shmai and Avtalion, which were the heads of the Jewish people in the early days of the Second Temple, the beginning of the Mishnah times. Avadia, the famous prophet Avadia, who prophesied about the fall of Edom. He himself was a descendant of Edom, meaning a descendant of Eisav. And that was what Yitzchak heard. So when Yitzchak heard that there's some hope in Eisav, what the Tzayid B'fiv, Rashi says as if a negative, that he tried to fool his father by asking questions in halacha. Yitzchak said, he's not fooling me. There's something holy there that wants to come out. So what are the Tzayid B'fiv? That's Rameir, Unkelish, Ma'avtali, Avadia. And Yitzchak's thinking was that we could work on Eisav directly. We could fix Eisav and get these sparks out without a process being done through Yaakov. Yaakov doesn't have to be involved in this. Because Yaakov is Zer Ampin, the holy system of the Midos, the world of Tikkun, fixing. Yaakov's job is to fix. He's the fixer. And in the Midos, has all the lights of the system of the Midos. And as it goes into the world of formation. In the 6 days of the week, like it says, Avdei Zakan Beisai, the servant, meaning the servant is this person who has to serve in the week, but he's the head of the house. His job is that Yaakov goes into the world, and his job is to refine. Now, if whether Yitzchak was trying to not to cut out Yaakov in general, like Yaakov has no job anymore, but not in dealing with the Eisav, seems like that's what Alter Rebbe is saying. Otherwise, what's Yaakov? If you're taking away Yaakov's job, that's not. But he seems like he wanted that Eisav didn't have to go through the process of Yaakov. Yitzchak Ratza, this left side, That doesn't have to go through Zah. It doesn't have to go through the means to say the Zah is a slow process. What is the idea of Zah? Refining from within, dealing from within, going into the weekday, changing yourself from within. He didn't want it to happen that there's a process, so say a struggle, and there has like Rivka got the prophecy that there's going to be a struggle between Eisav and Yaakov. They're going to have to work. One is up, one is down. It doesn't go like this. They're not going to be both up at the same time or down at the same time. Yitzchak says it doesn't have to go that way. Why don't we just overload Eisav with light, and that light will overpower all the negativity and push away the negative forces and reconnect, so to say, the head to the body. He wanted to bring the great lights into Eisav. What happens if you bring tremendous light? This, when he heard that he's able to ask a question about Torah, he saw that deep down, somewhere there's a concern for godliness, there's a concern for holiness, there's something special about Eisav. And so what happens if we just push that and overwhelm that with holiness? Maybe that could push out the negative side of it. Okay, he figured if you bring a big light, like the light of Solomon, right? Shlomo Melech had a big light, and all the sparks came to him. So he figured bring a big light into Eisav and bring out those sparks within him. Now, the question is, based on the teachings of Kabbalistic teachings and the teachings, we find this in Orach Chaim, when he talks about the woman who's taken in captive, right? The Yifat Toar, the beautiful woman taken in captive. So over there, the question is, obviously, that sometimes you take out the spark, and the idea is, like he says, that the spark overwhelms the person, takes over the person, becomes the host. Or if the person doesn't come to the host, at least you get the spark out. But now you can't leave the spark to be trapped. So Yitzchak seemingly didn't want to just take the spark out, but to reveal the spark, and that Eisav should be transformed. That's why the blessing, thinking that he's blessing Eisav, he says, may God give you from the dew of the earth, of the heaven. This is the dew that's talking about from the world from the level of Atik, of pleasure, means God, deep pleasure that goes down into the Midos. And he wanted that, which is later going to resurrect the dead in the comings of Mashiach. He wanted to bring that this great pleasure, this great light that could transform Eisav. Eisav all of a sudden who's becomes a slave to the pleasures of the world, to realize lachzis b'nei Hashem, to see the pleasures of godliness. Imagine Eisav who's a person who's driven by the pleasures of life. That's what motivates him. He's able to see that yes, pleasure is good, but there's holy pleasure, right? So that's what he wanted to reveal in Eisav, and then that would reconnect Eisav, and then you have a tremendous force because Eisav is strong. He does things. He's not chalak. He's not passive. So he wanted to bring that out in Eisav. In the fat of the earth. Shemin hu chachma. He wanted to bring both the pleasure and the wisdom. He wanted to connect him to the holy things. The Abba Yesod Barta, and from the father, meaning chachma, is the daughter, create something. Hanikar Eretz, which is the earth. Mishmani Eretz, defect the earth. He wanted to bring down the chachma and the pleasure. Again, the tal is connected to the pleasure, and the shaman is connected to the chachma, the oil. To bring out the sparks. He doesn't, from the basic translation, the word looks like he's looking to take out the sparks, but that would then it would seem like it was just it wasn't benefiting Eisav. The idea was to bring out the sparks in a way that would transform Eisav. Like we see, when the sun shines strong on the earth, right? What happens? All the moisture gets up. It draws out all the moisture of the earth. Like it says, the pasuk says about that the water, the moisture gets lifted up from the sun. Same strategy is when you have a big fire, like I said, by Shlomo Melech, it takes all the sparks. It takes away the small lights. When there's going to be a tremendous abundance of light coming from heaven, it draws and takes out all the sparks. Again, you have to maybe look at all the footnotes, but it seems like the idea is mainly that there's that it's the light transformed. Like if I'm going to read quickly the first part of footnote 261, because he says over there like this: V'ara Torah from the Tzemach Tzedek, Mevar Ritzayin Yitzchak al Pasik. By he Eisav ish yudei tzad ish sad of Yaakov ish tam yeshav oilam. And the verse says the difference between Eisav and Yaakov. The Eisav was a person side befiv, seemingly was a person of the field, hunting, and Yaakov was a person that sat in the tents. The Neshamas Yisrael yesh gam kim beis madregas b'derech klal. Not just that there's Eisav and Yaakov, but even in the souls of the Jewish people, there's two types of souls. Ha'alef yeshiv oilim, the person who sits in the tent. That Torah is their occupancy. That's what their living is. And the second type of person is Bali Asakim, a business person. That's a person who's really out there doing Torah mitzvahs. And he says that's also the difference. Torah is the person who sits in the tent, and mitzvahs is the person who's out in the field, has more opportunity to do mitzvahs. Like it says, Zvulun and Yisachar. Zvulun is the business person. Yisachar is the student, the person who studies. Therefore, he thought that we could make such a system. Not that there should be two types of souls by Yaakov. Maybe there's Yaakov who's going to be the yeshiva person, like he sat in the tent, and maybe we could turn Eisav into a good business person, to a holy business person. Because Eisav, he uses the word Eisav from the word doing, asiya, the same letters. Because Eisav maybe Eisav really he's out there in the field, but maybe just if you give him a structured job, then he'll be a proper businessman, a Torah businessman. And Zvulun comes before Yisachar, and therefore he gets the blessings. Therefore he wanted to bless Eisav. Because Eisav is in the world, and mitzvahs is connected. We learned with Keser, with the crown, with the pleasure. Yaakov learning Torah is connected to Chachma, and pleasure goes beyond. Is Keser, the crown sits on top of the head, and therefore Eisav gets the blessings over Yaakov. But the Tzemach Tzedek says, Ta Yitzchak b'zeh. He made a mistake. Because Chachma has to do that. You can't just create. The starting point has to be the Torah, and even though eventually the business person who's drawing energy from the Torah, Yaakov has to affect Eisav. Not that Eisav exists on his own, because that's not going to happen. There's going to be a disconnect. All right, let's go back to the original text. So he's so page 22. Okay, so he says that's what Yitzchak wanted, to give an overwhelming light to Eisav, and therefore to transform Eisav, or like the Tzemach says, the Machzedek says, even to turn him into the Jewish businessman, as opposed to being someone from another nation. But the only way this to work is for there to be a tremendous light. You can't just wish that to happen. It has to be given a lot of energy. This has to come from a blessing from above. We say the shtalch is above the chain, because in the chain of creation, Eisav has a disconnect. He's not driven by the pleasures of Torah. He's driven by the pleasures of the world. And because, like we said before, that he's connected to the Tumah, and the Tumah is disconnected and it's only siphoning off in an encompassing way, so there's no direct connection. You can't just reconnect. You can't put the wires together just like that. That has to come from a third party. That's a general rule in Chassidus, in Kabbalah. The Shlishi Medaber, that when you have two levels, 1 and 2, so you can't just connect 1 and 2 if they're separate. If they're separate, there has to be the third. Like Hashem says, "Vaydaber Hashem Moshe." God spoke to Moshe. There's Hashem and there's Moshe, and there's the narrator who is speaking about that. So the same thing that's within holiness. The same thing over here. If Yaakov, if the lights of the forces of negativity are disconnected, and Yaakov is connected, and you want Yaakov to affect that, and so they're separate. So you can't just put it back together. You have to have an outside force, a stronger force, and that was the blessings that Eisav wanted to give. Yitzchak wanted to give to Eisav. So if he say the shtalsh is like Eisav kedai. Because the end of the day is what you see in the potential of Eisav. That doesn't mean you have to bless him. He's not worthy of it. I'm going to bless you before God. Anytime it says Lifnei Hashem, before God, so usually the literal translation means so God should be giving you a blessing. But like we say in Yom Kippur, Lifnei Hashem Torah, that before God you should be purified, means you have to reach above the name of Hashem. The name of Hashem starts already with the system of creation Torah. Torah is Hashem. And therefore there's Yud that already starts with the concentration, and there's the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. That's already a system of creation. That's what the name of Yud Kevavke creates. And in creation, Eisav doesn't deserve. So Yitzchak says, if that's okay, I'm going to go Lifnei Hashem. I'm going to go beyond the name. There's an energy beyond the name. A name is already a contraction. God is putting him into the name. He's beyond. He himself, so to say, is beyond the name. So therefore, I'm going to go beyond the name, and I'm going to bless Eisav. I'm going to give him enough power that we can reconnect him. Why did he do that? Why did he want to cut Yaakov out? That the Eisav should be able to be connected directly with his force, so to say, without having to go through Yaakov. Because Yitzchak was so high, he saw things from above. And when you see things from above, you see the positive. When you see things from below, you're eye to eye with the negativity. So then you're saying, okay, whatever. I know you see the potential of the person, but I see the person as they are. They say the similar view is the difference between how Yisro saw the Jewish people, Moshe's father-in-law, and how Moshe saw the Jewish people. Moshe saw the people from above. Therefore, every time they came to him, their problems went away. They were overwhelmed by Moshe's greatness. But Yisro said, yeah, but that when they go away from you, they start fighting about petty things again. You need to have a judicial system. Because at the end of the day, when they come to you and they feel like their problems are small and everyone's getting along, that's okay. But then they go away from you and they come back to fighting about small things. So and because he saw the potential in Eisav, so therefore he wanted to go that direction. But the Rebbe says, Alter Rebbe says at the end of the day that was still a mistake. Why? At the end of the day is from Hashem's perspective. From seeing it from all the dimensions, it still has to go through Yaakov. Why? Because if Yitzchak would have accomplished what he wanted to do, so he would have one or two things would have happened. Either either he underestimated the negative force of Eisav, thinking that if I overwhelm him. Yes, Barbara, you asking a question?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. You were talking about how Hashem and Isaac saw everything from above. That Rebecca was there, and she was looking at both her sons, and she was seeing that Yaakov was more worthy of, the blessing than what Esau was. So how do you explain that?
Because Rivka was in her intuition, like women have. She saw it from God's perspective.
Okay, thank you.
She was able to see that Yitzchak was kind of, I don't want to use the word blinded, but he was seeing it just from a single view. And Rivka, because she was a person, she came from that background, she understood that maybe Yitzchak, like the Alter Rebbe is going to say now, was underestimating Eisav. Meaning to say, either that if the light would come down, Esav's negativity would swallow even up that, and then you have a bigger problem. And you've just given him more negative forces than he had, so that wouldn't be a good idea. It says, if he would give too much energy to Eisav, is either and that itself would also be swallowed up, or Eisav would lose himself. Eisav would not be able to. You want to transform Eisav. So, like I said before, the Alter Rebbe is not trying to say that if you're just trying to get all the sparks out of Eisav, and Eisav just falls apart, and that's all Yitzchak wanted, which doesn't make sense because he loved his son. So then fine, maybe you overwhelm and pull out the sparks. But Yitzchak wanted to transform Eisav, and if you want to transform Eisav, that's very risky because he says that one or two things would happen: either Eisav was stronger than you think in his negativity, and he would have swallowed the extra forces, or that he would be so overwhelmed that he would lose himself. He wouldn't be Eisav. He'd be like a person who's numb. So he said, there'd be nothing left of Eisav. But to really transform, that he remains as he is in his character, and he turned darkness into light and bitterness into sweetness. It's a process, and the process is slow. You can't overwhelm it. You can't beat the system. Yaakov has to deal with Eisav to transform that the negative becomes positive. Zod de Kedusha, it has to come through on an eye-to-eye level. That the 7 midas of holiness has to engage the 7 midas of impurity, and through that to transform the negative into positive. And so Eisav remains, but he remains in a way that's holy. And then you could transform Eisav and bring him into holiness. That's why we don't find that Eisav, that Yaakov, that Yitzchak, after he realized he made a mistake and he saw that Yaakov got the blessings, he doesn't call foul. He says, okay, that's the way it has to be. Eisav mishmani arz, mishmani miksa shmani. Therefore, the blessing he gives Eisav is not shmani arz, the fat of the earth, only a little bit of the fat of the earth, because too much of the fat of the earth would be bad. Yaakov Amar mishmani b'taisis, he gives him even more of the fat of the earth. He only gets a little bit that's left. That's going to be your pneumius. You can't have too much. You have to be slowly. Work on Eisav slowly. And Yaakov takes the tainug. It's only Yaakov who could make Eisav recognize the pleasures of godliness. It has to come through a process. It comes from above. Slowly, it's in an encompassing way. And it's on a condition. And what is the condition? You have to serve your brother. You have to have bittul. That you want to have elevation, you must be nullified to Yaakov. But to just be Eisav as Eisav is and to transform that alone, that's not going to work. Now we can understand the question that he originally asked. What does it mean that when Eisav walked into the room, he smelled something thinking that this is Eisav? What's this reich? What was this smell? Like we said before, like we said before, that Yitzchak wanted to give a stronger encompassing energy. He wanted to overwhelm that levana, the 11th spice that connects, that gives energy to the negative. But if you give so much power, maybe that's going to push positive even into the negative forces. Then how do you, what inspires to give? There has to be what's called halasman, the elevation of the mayim nukvim of the female waters that brings attraction, the response of the male waters. How do we get that this should be brought down? The male waters, mayim duchrim means the male waters, is that should go in an internal way. So then you could have just an internal relationship that if you want to get something b'pnimius, so you could give something pnimius. If you give some from your essence, right? The ma'im nukvim, you give from your essence, so you get from the essence, you get something internal. Avlam shachas ma'im duchim, where you want to get there's a concept of the giving of the male waters, which is called makav in an encompassing way. There has to be the smell. That's why there's a power of smell. I mean, smell is an encompassing. And like he says, I smell, when he wanted to give, because Yitzchak wanted to give an encompassing energy, it had to be inspired by an encompassing concept. And that was the smell of the Garden of Eden that he smelled from Yaakov, walking into the room. And reach is itself, when why does a person want to smell good? That brings attraction, right? Oh, wow, that smells nice. So a person gets attracted to that. So, but that's an encompassing attraction. That's a reflecting light, meaning to say it's trying to bring back something. But who magvuris, and that also comes from gvura. That he says, for instance, smell. He says a good smell comes from sharpness, which is gvura, which is Yitzchak. Because we're trying to get Yitzchak to be inspired. Yitzchak is gvura. He gets inspired by something sharp. Like he says, a sweet apple doesn't have a smell. A bitter apple, a chamutz has a smell, right? If you smell those green apples, that has a smell, but a sweet apple doesn't necessarily have a smell. Like a chametz, it's something that is charif, that is sharp. Yesh v'hem reach chazak has a stronger smell. Ulufi, why is that? What does it mean? The female water, so to say, in the system of creation, we're not talking about just in relationships, but the system of creation in godliness is where's that energy to give off of a smell comes. I mean, a smell that's attractive. It's supposed to be attractive to the giving forces of holiness. It comes from the broken vessels. The broken vessels create a smell that tells the giving forces that there's something here. Pay attention to me. Try to bring me out. Try to elevate me. The mitzvahs, the other mitzvahs don't have the effect like a smell, like a carbon, like a sacrifice has. By sacrifice, it says a good smell to God. Because the animal, what's the point of a sacrifice? We've learned many times is to sacrifice the animal. It's to elevate the energy of the animal. And the energy of the animal comes also from the broken vessels, and therefore, because it's the you're bringing something back to God, that's that negative energy of the animal comes back as in a form of smell that affects God. And we know when a person has a good smell, or a sharp smell, it jolts someone up, right? One of the ways you put something sharp under someone's nose, if that person faints or something, could bring the person back to life. If a person kind of their mind goes away in a way of faint or deep sleep, and you can wake them up with a sharp smell. Like a person who falls asleep or dreams off, you put on under sharp smell, they wake up. You say when the Rebbe Marash, the fourth Rebbe Chabad, would say Mammar, so they blocked the door, meaning there was no going in and out. There's a lot of strict rules by him. And if anyone dreamed off, there's some people who had the job, and their job was to put very sharp smell under the person's nose. Because when the person falls asleep, their mind kind of drifts off. And after the person wakes up, then the person wakes up. And what affects this is the smell. That's a reflecting light, a strong light that goes backwards. This is the pleasure that God has when he sees the carbon specifically, because it's in the carbon is the smell, bringing the tremendous light that got fallen into unholiness and brings it back to holiness. Like we said before, Eisav had no internal light. The internal energy was lost, and all it did is fed pleasure and killing and all the things that Eisav did on a daily basis. His everything inside was swallowed up and giving energy to negativity. But it did have a connection. He had the 11th spice that was encompassing him. And he smelled the clothing of Eisav. He smelled the potential that he has a strong makif, and he figured if I give more to the encompassing energy, that will push through to push the sparks out, and they should no longer be lost and trapped by unholiness. And that smell of the potential, because all Eisav had was a good smell. The person himself is rotten, but he gave off a good smell, a good fragrance. Why? Because he was connected. He had a high connection that was giving light to negativity, but there was potential, and Yitzchak smelled that, and he thought he smelled that from Eisav, and he thought, oh, this is what I'm trying to do. And he says, this is the field of God. So he says, Hine, Malchus Atzilus. I'm trying to go a little further. We're going to get to there's another question, obviously. What's the obvious question to this? But it wasn't Eisav, it was Yaakov. So if Eisav is encompassing and his whole connection is encompassing and Yaakov is internal, so what was the smell he smelled? Because in reality, it wasn't Eisav who walked into the room, it was Yaakov. So before he gets to that question, he says that what does he smell? Asadu b'chinas malchus atzilus shvem gamkein b'chinas losman v'yesh b'm beis b'chinas. Okay, so I'm going to skip this part because he basically says that what is the difference? The difference is there's the part of the flow that's constant. There's the part of the flow that has to be dug off. There's the bear Miriam that always gives water, and there's the bear of Yitzchak that has to be dug up and revealed, and that's the measured. And once those waters are revealed, it kind of gives life to all forces. Because and again, Makav, the difference between Makav and Pnimi in general, when something is an encompassing energy, like a light of the sun, the light of the sun doesn't say, oh, I'm only going to give light to this person or to that house or whatever. Light of the sun gives light everywhere. And someone who wants to do something negative, then the sun is going to give light to that person. If you want to use the sun of light for something positive, that's your choice. But the sun is there. That's the downside of Makif. It's just there. That's why it can give forces. That's why it gives energy to negative forces. But there's a connect. So the Yitzchak wanted to try to focus that energy and maybe try to elevate Eisav that way. But the way it goes in there, he smells it that this is an encompassing energy and therefore gives light to everything. He gives, and therefore he says the shepherds of Gerar of Plishtim, which is negative, also wanted the waters of Yitzchak. They said it's not just for you. If it's an encompassing energy, we also want to take from the encompassing energy. Okay, so let's just go down to Dalit because I wanted to get to this question because that's about us. Well, now we're talking about what Yitzchak wanted to do, but what really happened. That's the way Yitzchak understood it, thinking that it's Eisav. Thinking that Eisav's in front of him. But the truth is it wasn't Eisav, it was Yaakov. So if you're saying that's because there's this encompassing energy that because he can't internalize it, and therefore he's giving off this tremendous fragrance of positivity, but it's not coming from Eisav, it's coming from Yaakov. So why was Yaakov giving off this fragrance? Here he says, it says it in a short note, but I just actually before here learned the Mammar that explains this, and so try to give it over like this. It says in the Medrash, if he smelled the smell of his clothing, the word begadav means beged, or baigadav means rebellion. So the word beged, we could have clothing, and we could have baigadav, which means rebellion. And what is a rebellion? It means a person who once rebelled. And what Yitzchak smelled, that even Yaakov has, the level of tshuva, because no one's perfect. So begadav b'chinas bal tshuva, he smelled that's not just the absolute negative forces in the world that have negativity, but there's also people who are trying to do good, but or either they fall or they feel their distance in their. It means there's two ways you have tshuva. We've learned before. There's the tshuva for the sin, and there's the tshuva for the distance. It means even a tzaddik has tshuva because every tzaddik is distant from God. You're in the world. You're not in the world of holiness. You're not in the Garden of Eden. You're in a world that has to deal with reality. So because of that, you're feeling distant and you want to return to God. And in that way, you feel a little as a boyged, a person who's rebelling. You're not there. So he says, "Vayarches reach begadav baigadav." Bechinas Baal Tshuva, he smelled the Baal Tshuva of the Jew, of Yaakov. Shebechinas Makav, that also is an encompassing energy. The Mashchin lebechal yati, like we know, the Baal Tshuva has a stronger energy, wants to go back to God. Shebezar, like it says, Avram zaknu baba yamim, that Avram became old and he was coming into his days. Zaken inu mardit yufta de Mashchin. He says, what does that mean? So he says those are the days that bring you towards. I'm going to read the whole Zohar. He says, Ashreim Baal Tshuva, praise be of Baal Tshuva. Within one day, 1 second, you could become close to God. This is all the Zohar. You could become closer even than the highest level of tzaddik. She's that spent their whole life being close to God. When did Avram slowly get close to God? Only when he became old. But a Baal Tshuva, who in 1 minute comes back to God, in 1 second cleaves to God. And they have a stronger urge of the heart than the tzaddik who's slowly building up. It says Yitzchak, Avram became Baba Yam only when he was old. He became complete. But the Baal Tshuva could come complete in 1 moment. So he says, it's stronger the days that happen, that the days of the tzaddik takes mashkin, takes time. Because the Baal Tshuva has a stronger level of the soul. He doesn't even have a vessel that could take in the great energy of this positive feeling of return. Like the story of Rabbi Tzvi ben Dertari, which was a righteous person who cried himself to death. From Tshuva. Avram Chsiv Baba Yom, it took him time, it took him vessels, it took him clothing to get close to God. This by God of when Yitzchak smelled the power of Tshuva of Yaakov, that also is an encompassing energy because it can't remain in the body. That's why the Baal Tshuva is boiling with love for Hashem. It can't contain it. When a person realizes the greatness of God, that God doesn't change. It's only the ray of God in the world. And nevertheless, he shows his ray towards the Jewish people. They don't have to have a virus to be a Baal Tshuva, but just to raktsayek al period. You don't want to be distant from God. So that means a person. It means what is that? What the Alter Rebbe is saying over here is an amazing idea. The Baal Tshuva is not the fact that you sinned. The Baal Tshuva is that the sin caused you to get this tremendous, uncontainable love. So either you could get that uncontainable love by really being distant from God through sin, or you could get that uncontainable love even if you're a tzaddik, but not just going through a passive day-to-day, but by recognizing the greatness of God, and you don't want to be in this mundane world. So therefore you're screaming for the distance. Also you have an uncontrollable passion. And that creates the smell, the fragrance of Yaakov. Therefore he's able to bring down the great blessings. Because like you said before, in order to get the fragrance from Yitzchak, you have to Makiv attracts the Makiv, and external attracts external, and internal attracts eternal. So a Primi brings a Pnimistic response. But you want a Makiv, you want an overwhelming, encompassing energy that can't be contained in a vessel that comes from Yitzchak. Show the part of you that also can contain the feelings for God. But what do you mean? Yaakov anyways would have got it because he's holy. Like we said before, he doesn't just want the trickle effect. He wants the full power of the blessing, the abundance. And how do you connect with above the chain of creation, not the system of creation? Is get out of yourself. Get out. Have that passion for God. Not according to the system. We're turning to the final page, 24. But to have the halachas, the laws, and the godais, that clothe themselves in the worldly things. Where do you find there's certain things that only come out in the worldly halachas? And it says v'chol Torah b'sipur ma'ases, and the stories. There's so much secrets in the stories of Torah, but those stories had to happen in this world. The Nevi'im and the prophecies and the Shoftim, the judges, the story of Shimshon and Pelegish Begiva. There's tremendous light and sparks in those stories. But in order to get in touch with those stories, you have to get out of yourself. The kings, the stories in the Gemara, Rabbi Barachana, others, he's quoting different types of stories of the Talmud. These are the secrets of Torah. There's also within the action of the mitzvahs. When a person sits in the sukkah, shakes the lulav, puts on tzitzis, puts on tefillin physically, It's only then you bring down the light higher than the world, which is higher than the Seder Shlal through the action that you bring down into this world. And how do you bring down this abundance of light? That's through Yitzchak. That's why Yitzchak is in Rivka Torah, which is the source of Gvura, which is power, force. By Tzina de Kardinusa, the measuring force that sees something and forces even down. Shukava Mida, the line that measures. You can only have abundance when you know when there's a limit. That's one of the rules, right? If there's no one measuring, then how do you know if there's an abundance? First, there has to be the measurement, and then you give above that measurement. So Yitzchak knows what's deserving and gives more than that. That's why he says Elikim specifically, the name of God of measurement. That Havaya should give into Elikim. There should be an abundance that goes into the limitations. But that only had to come, that Yaakov could only get the blessings of Torah, of abundance. But Yitzchak, it had to be without Yitzchak's agreement. He couldn't know about that. It had to come b'mirma. It had to come through fooling. And this is a big idea in Chassidus. She actually slaps das because consciously, Yitzchak would never give that to Yaakov. He says, you have Torah. Why do you have to have an abundance of light, an abundance? You're good. So it had to come b'mirma. Why? Because we lost our innocence with foolishness, with being fooled by the snake. In order to get it back, it has to be through foolishness. That's one of the rules. That's why Yaakov has to take it through this way. That's why a lot of Yaakov's dealings had to come not directly. Why? Because it was taken from us non-directly. That's what he says. He came with cleverness, or you could translate it even with cheatingness. She actually established das because logically Yitzchak would never give those blessings to Yaakov. It's not because we merit something we get it. That's the idea of mazel. What's mazel? Why see someone has mazel? If a person deserves something, it's not mazel. I deserve it. Mazel means luck. What's luck? It means you were lucky. Not that you didn't deserve it. So why did you get it? Because it's beyond logic. If I merit something, that's the system of creation. I deserve it. If it's my mazel that gives it to me, it's more than I deserve. That's why it's called mazel. Even though I don't deserve it. And why did we have to do it this way? That's the only way to fix the sin of the tree of knowledge. Because the snake tricked Chava and Adam. And because trickery is how negative forces got energy, the only way to get it back is through trickery. Because through his tricking of Chava, then there was a mixture of spiritual and material and spiritual, and the worlds became more gashmistic, more materialistic. How do we change it? Take it back. That we should bring down more light, right? So the snake doesn't allow. So just like he tricked us, we have to trick him back. But if we wouldn't have got the brachas, means Rivka had the water on her shoulder above. How do we bring the water down? How do we bring it into the world? How do we bring the mitzvahs that the world transforms? The Torah transforms the world. Means otherwise, he said, had Yaakov never taken the blessings, he's saying almost a scary statement, Alter Rebbe saying, had Yaakov never gotten the blessings from Yitzchak, then Torah mitzvahs would have been a spiritual existence. It would have been, the world would stay mundane, and we would just be doing spiritual things that kind of are totally disconnected from reality. We wouldn't be transforming the world. The only way we could transform the world and allow that the physical material, the desires of the world, we could transform that into holiness, we had to bring it down through that we had to take Yitzchak's abundance of blessings that overrides the system. And in order to do that, it had to be in a certain way of trickery, that he dressed up as Eisav, thinking that he's Eisav. But at the end, he agrees. This is how it has to be. And this is how the whole world will be transferred. And this is how we're going to be able to get ready for the coming of Mashiach. Laila Tov, everyone. And we should only have
Rabbi.
Yes, go ahead.
Rabbi, I just have a quick question.
Sure.
Now, what qualities of Eisav caused him to be the ancestor of all converts or some converts? I mean, how does that translate?
No, because he had spark, he had holiness in him, and that holiness, the holiness is not just a spark that has no life to it. It's a spark that actually has a life and a host. and that host is the actual convert that comes out of that host. That the spark goes into. So Reb Meir, Ashma Avatali, all the people that he mentioned, and I'm sure there was others, he's just mentioning the famous ones that are converts from the descendants of Eisav, so that those sparks go out and they find a host in holiness. Reb Meir is one of the founding fathers of the Mishnah. I mean, the Mishnah wouldn't be the Mishnah without Reb Meir. And Shmai Vavtalim were the great teachers of Hillel. And Avadia was the great prophet, and Unkelis is the translator of the Chumash. So these are people that not just that they came holy, but they contributed to holiness. They furthered the interest of Torah into this world.
Is that how you can manifest more the qualities of Yaakov in this world? I mean, I guess as a woman, obviously, I mean, I studied Torah. I mean, I study the Torah portion every day, but obviously I'm never going to be a Torah scholar. But how can I, as a woman, bring this light from Yaakov?
Through studying Torah, women study Torah. Through studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, women do mitzvahs. Everyone, both men and women are studying Torah and doing mitzvahs. By doing Torah mitzvahs, and especially the mitzvahs that are special for women, like keep family purity and Shabbos candles and making challah. Right? When a woman bakes challah, that's not just like so there's bread in the house. Baking challah is bringing tremendous blessings. Right? What are the three things that Rivka brings immediately into the tent? And he brought it in right away. Rashi says that there was a blessing in the bread, and there was blessing in the candles, and there was the cloud which represented family purity on top of the tent.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rabbi.